Welcome back to our topic of agricultural drought assessment. In the last video lecture, we have discussed about the different definitions of drought, when and where drought is to be considered, and the important features of drought, how it is different from other natural hazards. And we have also discussed the impact of the droughts. In the current video lecture, we will try to classify the drought. I hope you will be, by the end of this class, you will be able to classify the drought. And I hope you will also be able to explain the procedure of prediction and monitoring of agricultural drought. Now, before going for this classification of drought, I would like to make it clear that drought is not just the non-availability of or deficiency of rainfall, non-availability of water, or shortage of deficit in or decrease in precipitation levels, or decrease in moisture levels. It is also to be considered as a drought. Now, based upon this, drought has been classified into three types: the meteorological drought, the hydrological drought, and the agricultural drought. The first one being the meteorological drought, which is identified as a deficiency in the precipitation level from normal or average levels. Normally, a deficiency of 10% is generally allowed for precipitation, but if there is a deviation of more than 10% for a prolonged duration in the precipitation level, it is to be considered as a meteorological drought. So, if the rainfall, what we call as rainfall, if there is a deviation from of somewhere around 25% from the general one, it is to be considered as a normal drought or is slight drought. If the deviation is between 26 to 50% from the average rainfall level, it is to be considered as a mild drought or moderate drought. And if it is greater than that, let us suppose if there is a deficit of 50% of the rainfall than the actual or average one, then it is to be considered as a severe drought. So, meteorological drought is basically concerned with the deviation or deficit of precipitation levels. On the other hand, hydrological drought, it is majorly concerned with the deficit in water levels, both the surface water levels and subsurface water levels. If there is a deficit in water levels availability, then it is to be treated as hydrological drought. We take a best example of Hyderabad. In Hyderabad, we don't expect any vegetation to happen. We don't expect any crops or any farmlands. Most of the places are basically industrial or commercial or domestic. So all these areas basically, we don't experience any green vegetation in most of the areas in Hyderabad. But still it is to be considered as a drought area. Why? Because the availability of water level is very, very low in Hyderabad. Even if we dig up 200 feet or 500 feet also, it will be difficult for us to find water here in Hyderabad. So this is considered as hydrological drought. Non-availability of water for specific needs is termed as hydrological drought. So if there is a high level of precipitation, then automatically the water evaporates, and if there is a huge utilization and if there is a high precipitation, in either of the cases the water will be too much evaporated or absorbed, and thereby it results in hydrological droughts. Now moving on to the agricultural drought, the last one or the most important one. This is triggered by both meteorological and hydrological droughts. So wherein the soil loses its moisture level, the rainfall may be adequate, the soil may lose its moisture level, and thereby the crop experiences some sort of stress, and so the yield of the crop production or the cereal production will be very, very low because of the stress on the crops. So this sort of things is basically called as agricultural drought, where the soil loses its moisture level and not suitable for cultivation, or the crops may be experiencing some stress or water scarcity. So, as you all know, plant water demand basically depends on the weather conditions, biological characteristics of the specific plant, their state of growth, and see the properties of the soil. So, if any of these things gets damaged, then automatically the production will be damaged, the yield will be reduced. So, in this case, since rainfall is also, availability of water is also an important factor. So, defaultly, if there is a scarcity in rainfall or non-availability of water, so it will result in poor yield, and this is to be termed as agricultural droughts. And see the last one. You can go through this last one. This is the agricultural drought, particularly related to our country. It is defined as a period of 4 consecutive weeks of severe meteorological drought, or with a rainfall deficiency of more than 50% of the long-term average, which means severe drought, or with a weekly rainfall of 5 centimeters or less from mid-May to mid-October. This is called as a Kharif season. ఇప్పుడు కొత్తగా తెలంగాణలో పేరు మార్చారు యాసంగి, సారీ వానాకాలం అని. సో వానాకాలంలో 5 సెంటీమీటర్స్ కంటే తక్కువ వర్షం పడుతుంది ఎవ్రీ వీక్ అనుకుంటే, then it is to be considered as agricultural drought. This is the season where most of the country cultivation will be going on. Nearly 80% of the crop yield comes from this particular Kharif season or Yasangi season, even in our state. So I'll show you a picture now. See, this is time duration of different types of droughts. See, let us suppose now, if there is a variation in the natural climates, and see if there are high temperatures or high winds, or the relative humidity is very, very low, which means the clouds are not covering too much and there is a huge amount of sunshine, so thereby leading high temperatures and hot winds are coming into that, and the deficiency is decreasing, the precipitation is decreasing. So because of all these things, if the temperature is high, if the sunshine is high, then automatically what happens? There will be a huge amount of evaporation and transpiration. On the other hand, if precipitation is in the deficit, then see, there will be a runoff and there will be a reduced groundwater recharge. Water will not sink into the ground. So because of all these reasons, see, these are basically characteristics of meteorological drought. So because of the meteorological drought, what will happen? Since there is a more amount of evaporation and there is a reduced recharge of water into the ground, so what will happen? The soil loses its moisture content. So as a result, what happens? The crops or the plants may not get sufficient amount of water, and thereby what happens? Yield will be less, and this particular thing is called as agricultural drought. See, meteorological drought, if it remains for a longer duration, it will result in agricultural drought. This increased evaporation and reduced groundwater recharge, it will result in non-availability of water for these plants. If it still continues, then automatically it will lead to this hydrological drought. Even the availability of water also will go, it will decrease. So this will directly impact the wildlife, and wetlands will be reduced wetlands. So this is the hydrological drought. So for a shorter duration, meteorological drought, if it prolongs, leads to agricultural drought, and still prolongs, leads to hydrological drought. And if it still prolongs, then it will defaultly have an impact on the society in economic view, social view, and environmental. Now, I hope you have understood the classification of drought. And next, we will move on to the most important one, agricultural drought. We don't bother about this meteorological and hydrological drought now. We are more concerned about the agricultural drought, where we do get more amount of yield. So in this particular video lecture, we will try to classify, we will try to understand the agricultural drought. Agricultural drought is the drought where we do experience shortage of crop yield. As we have seen, there are two seasons. One is Kharif season, the other is Rabi season. Kharif season majorly depends upon the rainfall. So if there is a scarcity in rainfall, then we do experience less yield. Now we will classify this agricultural drought into 4 or 5 things based upon the availability of rain. Now the first one is being early season drought. The next one is mid-season drought. Next is a late season or terminal drought. The next is apparent drought and permanent drought. These are other 2 types. First we will see the first 3 types. Early season drought, mid-season drought and late season drought. So the first thing is Varshalu Ippudu Meeru, if you are a farmer, then you understand what is a rainfall requirement. First of all, we do need some rainfall. So we start sowing. So when we don't get first rainfall, it is considered to be early season drought. If there is slow coming of monsoon, which means that the monsoon doesn't come on time, if we don't see the first rains, then automatically what happens? The net sown area, because ఫస్ట్ వర్షాలు పడ్డప్పుడే మనం పంట వేయటం స్టార్ట్ చేస్తాం. ఓకే, మాన్సూన్ స్టార్ట్ అయింది ఆ ఉద్దేశంతో మనం పంట వేయటం స్టార్ట్ చేస్తాం. సో ఇఫ్ దర్ ఈస్ ఎర్లీ సీజన్ డ్రాట్, అంటే స్టార్టింగ్ టైంలోనే పంటలు పండలేదు అనుకున్నాం. సో ఆటోమేటిక్లీ వాట్ హ్యాపెన్స్ అన్న, ఆన్సెట్ ఈస్ టైమ్లీ. It is called as a loss of crop yield due to early season moisture stress. See the third one, dry spell leads to moisture stress, which results in crop mortality and loss of net sown area. So ఫస్ట్ విత్తనాలు వేసినప్పుడు అప్పుడే దానికి నీళ్ళు అందలేదు అనుకున్నాం. సో ఆటోమేటిక్ ఏమైపోతారు, కొంతమంది ఏమో వర్షం వచ్చిన తర్వాత వేస్తారు. ఆ వర్షమే రాలేదంటే ఆటోమేటిక్ ఏమైపోతుందిరా, ఎవరు పంట కూడా స్టార్ట్ చేయరు బేసికల్గా. సో ఇన్ టైంలో చేతికి రాదు. లేదు, కొంతమంది ఏం చేస్తారంటే ఈ టైంకి వస్తుందనే ఉద్దేశంతో వేస్తారు. వేసిన తర్వాత తొలకరి వర్షం పడాలి, పడితేనే అప్పుడు ఆటోమేటిక్ అయితే చిగురు వస్తుంది బేసిక్. అది రాలేదనుకున్నాం. సో ఆటోమేటిక్ అయితే దే విల్ బి హై ఛాన్సెస్ ఆఫ్ క్రాప్ మోర్టాలిటీ. ద క్రాప్ మే నాట్ రైజ్. సో దిస్ ఈస్ కాల్డ్ as early season drought. So once let us suppose there is a initial rainfall వచ్చింది అనుకుందాం. నెక్స్ట్ వి సీ ద మిడ్ సీజన్ డ్రాట్. మిడ్ సీజన్ డ్రాట్లో ఏమవుతుందంటే క్రాప్ కమ్స్ ఇన్ టు వెజిటేటివ్ ఫేస్. సో ఈ టైంలో దానికి సఫిషియంట్ క్రాప్ కావాలి, బేసిక్ సఫిషియంట్ రెయిన్ కావాలి. సో ఈ టైంలో దానికి సఫిషియంట్ వాటర్ అవైలబిలిటీ లేదనుకున్నాం. అంటే ఫస్ట్ వర్షాలు పడ్డాయి, ఫస్ట్ 1 వీక్ మాన్సూన్ టైంకి వచ్చింది, బట్ తర్వాత అసలు వర్షం జాడే లేదు. తర్వాత వర్షం పడితేనే పొలం పంటలు చేతికి వస్తాయి, అంటే పంటలు బాగా పెరుగుతూ ఉంటాయి బేసిక్. సో ఈ పర్టికులర్ మిడ్ సీజన్ డ్రాట్ అంటే ఏంటంటే ఫస్ట్ వర్షాలు పడి తర్వాత మనకు కనబడకుండా పోతాం. మిడ్ సీజన్ డ్రాట్ అంటే ఒక 1 month or 1.5 months. లెట్ us సపోజ్ జూన్లో స్టార్ట్ అయింది మాన్సూన్, మళ్ళీ జూలై ఆగస్ట్ మొత్తానికే వర్షాలు లేవనుకున్నాం. ఇట్ ఈస్ కన్సిడర్డ్ టు బి మిడ్ సీజన్ డ్రాట్. సో ఈ టైంలో ఏమైతుందంటే క్రాప్ మొలకొచ్చింది, ఇనిషియల్ రెయిన్ఫాల్ వచ్చింది కాబట్టి, బట్ ఏంటంటే గ్రోత్ ఉండదు. సీ ద సెకండ్ పార్ట్ దర్, క్రాప్ బికమ్స్ స్టంటెడ్ బట్ సర్వైవ్స్. ద థర్డ్ వన్ ఈజ్ లేట్ సీజన్ ఆర్ టర్మినల్ డ్రాట్. లేట్ సీజన్ ఆర్ టర్మినల్ డ్రాట్ అంటే రీప్రొడక్షన్ ఫేజెస్. ఫస్ట్ మొలక వచ్చింది, తర్వాత పెద్దగైంది, పెద్దగైన తర్వాత ఇప్పుడు నీకు పండు రావాలంటే ఏమో వాళ్ళు ఫ్లవర్స్ రావాలి, రీప్రొడక్షన్ జరగాలి బేసిక్గా. ఆ టైంలో వర్షం లైట్గానే పడాలి, పడితేనే దెన్ దే విల్ బి, అంటే అట్లీస్ట్ క్లైమేట్ ఒక్కసారిగా వేడి అయిపోయింది అనుకుందాం, ఆటోమేటిక్గా ఏమైపోతుంది రా, దే విల్ బి నో రీప్రొడక్షన్. సో పంట పెరిగింది, ఏపుగా పెరిగింది, కానీ ఏంటంటే దిగుబడి లేదు. సో దిస్ ఈస్ కన్సిడర్డ్ as లేట్ సీజన్ ఆర్ టర్మినల్ డ్రాట్. సో డ్యూరింగ్ దిస్ పర్టికులర్ లేట్ సీజన్ ఆర్ టర్మినల్ డ్రాట్ ఎట్లా తెలుస్తుంది అంటారా, దే విల్ బి స్ట్రెస్ ఇన్ ఫ్లవరింగ్. సో ఫ్లవరింగ్ సరిగ్గా కాదు, పంట పెరిగి ఉంటుంది కానీ దిగుమతి రాదు. సో quantity and quality of the yield, it will be affected with the late season or terminal drought. So I hope now you have understood what is the classification of agricultural drought: early state, mid state and late season. And apart from that, see apparent drought and permanent drought. Apparent drought means differential stress to crops for same amount of rainfall. Now ఈ apparent drought ఎట్లుంటుందంటే, ఇప్పుడు 2 వేసాను, ఒక పంటకేమో సరిపోయినంత వర్షం వచ్చింది. ఇప్పుడు యూ నో దట్ డిఫరెంట్ క్రాప్స్ రిక్వైర్ డిఫరెంట్ అమౌంట్స్ ఆఫ్ రెయిన్ఫాల్. సో వన్ క్రాప్ feels that it is sufficient rainfall, while the other crop the rainfall may not be sufficient. So this type of difference is called as differential stress is called as apparent drought. So